Are we live there? Okay, can I start? Okay. Good evening and welcome to season 2, episode 4 of Let's Talk Social. My name is Azfar Mustafa. I'll be hosting today's show along with co-host Mohammad Hammad.
Hello.
Today's topic of discussion is current Indian education system, prospects and challenges. That is the problems and challenges faced by the education system today and the prospects of the future. To give us his professional insight on the topic, we have a special guest expert, Dr. S. Vijayakumar. He's been part of the Indian education system as a teacher since 2004 and as a student since long before that. He taught at SRM Institute of Hotel Management, Apollo Engineering College, and is currently a professor at B.S. Abdul Rahman Crescent Institute of Science and Technology. Welcome, Dr. Vijayakumar. Thank you so much for taking out the time to talk to us today.
Yeah, thank you for hosting me. It's my pleasure.
So let's jump right into the first question. Current Indian education system prospects and challenges. For the first question, for a long time now, the knowledge or the content that was taught in the higher education system hasn't been updated. Moreover, the method of teaching relies more on memorizing concepts and less on understanding. For example, even during the exams, the highest priority is given to exact textbook answers. Do you believe, sir, that this methodology and content needs to be updated throughout the Indian education system so as to include more interactive concept-based learning that that interests students more?
Yeah. So that's really a fascinating question to start with, but it has a lot of variables in it. The first variable I presume is about the methodology of instruction. Should we really perk up the methodology? Is it really outdated? Or are we actually following the same obsolete syllabus? Very pertinent question. Uh, but it has various answers. We can't give an one size fits all answer to this particular question. Of course, it actually depends. You see, the policymakers, the first thing is policymakers. They have been formulating a lot of new policies time and time again to revamp the educational system, to make it more interactive, to make it more fun based. And we have different kind of pedagogies, a different kind of epistemologies really coming up. So we can't just say that the methods are really obsolete. There has been a lot of initiatives taken in this direction by both the higher education as well as the national educational policies, which are really towards revamping the syllabus. Having said that, we should also take the students' perspective whenever these questions, these kind of debates or discussions, calibrated discussions takes place in the classroom. Students take on these issues. They feel that the syllabus is really obsolete. They feel that it has to be more interactive. It is because of many factors. It is because we have large classrooms, and it isn't possible for a teacher to maintain that kind of one-to-one interaction. So, but as far as syllabus is concerned, we have a project oriented learning. Nowadays, we have, as I said, new kind of pedagogies, a new kind of technologies to leverage instruction. So, we are just moving in the right direction. But to answer your question specifically, yes, although the policies are aimed at revamping the syllabus, it still needs more interactive components. It has to be more practical based. It has to be more calibrated, where by the end of the course the student should go and execute, and it shouldn't actually rely on rote learning. And unfortunately, that is what's happening today, because most of the content is about the cramming all the information and just presenting it. So this has to change, so that there should be some kind of an objective based teaching. It has to be more practical. As you said, it has to be more fun oriented. And for that to take place, I think we have to really, first thing is practical solution. You got to really perk up the teaching infrastructure in terms of technologies. And again, some places, the pedagogies could be really good. Again, it depends on the place. A child who, gets an exposure at the cosmopolitan places or the cities, have a better exposure. Whereas take a child who is from the suburbs, who is from the south, and who comes from villages. Unfortunately, the same child, although the same content, although the same curriculum, the delivery methods could be different, probably because of lack of infrastructure. But it's a great question to start with. If the content is really interactive, if the pedagogies are interactive, if the epistemologies drive those kind of instruction in order to make teaching more interactive and fun based, I'm sure that the objectives will be achieved. And we have a long way to go in this direction, because there should be a kind of an universalization. There should be a kind of common benchmarking to bring this kind of interactive syllabus. So there should be a kind of a common syllabus which can be interactive. So really a fascinating question to start with. Hope I have answered the question.
Sir, you've given us an in-depth insight in this question, and I completely agree with what you said, sir. Model learning is like an integrated model of learning. If we just technology alone can't also work wonders, and just the restrictive old curriculum cannot work wonders alone. But however, like you said, if we chuck the differences behind and we collaboratively make a learning environment that includes both technology and the important traditional ways of learning, we nothing can stop our country from once again becoming the greatest pioneers of learning and education.
Absolutely. Yeah,
Now,
absolutely.
moving
Yes,
on
sir.
to the next question. The next question is about dropout rates. Let me just define dropout rate. So, dropout rate is the percentage of students that leave or exit either school or college before completion. And for the question, over to you, Hamad.
Okay, thank you, Asfar. So now let's talk about wastage of resources in our system. Our education system is built primarily on general education. The dropout rate is abnormally high throughout the country. A large number of undergraduates drop out of college before finishing their course or drop out of school itself. This leads to wastage of financial and human resources. Why do you think the dropout rate is so high, and what is the solution to this problem?
Yeah, this is really quite a challenging situation, but it's very difficult to come out with a concrete solution. But however, first let's address the issues and then talk about the solutions. Primarily, the reason for the dropouts is, if you see, many graduates, when they just come to colleges, I have even asked these kind of questions to the students. How many of you do think really choose a particular profession which they do it passionately out of their own choice? And if students choose anything out of their own whims and fancy, and not somebody thrusting or subjecting their opinions, I'm sure from the student side, there wouldn't be a dropout. So, dropout, although there are financial reasons, I primarily feel if a child identifies or is helped to identify her skill, and based on that, if a particular course is chosen for this child which fits into the ambit of the child's passion, then I'm sure that the dropouts will not take place at the higher educational landscape. So this is the higher educational level. And secondly, if you take this phenomenon of dropouts, uh, it all boils down to financial status, the financial status of a family. The healthcare as well as education are two things which has to be provided free of cost for dropouts, to stop dropouts. But unfortunately, in a country like us, there are two things which are very costly. One is education, and we all speak that it is really commercialized. And the second one is healthcare. And these two things are the pillars which keeps the economy of our country running. So the dropout rates is just because of the economical condition of the family. So if government really talk about the solution, if government can really take initiatives Probably they just give a free noon meal scheme, which has reached a lot of people at the primary and secondary level, and many students do turn up to schools exclusively for this purpose. So that is really a great initiative at all levels. If you see, again, there is a statistics that says in US, if you see the government-based schools, which they call it as, public schools, there are about 90%, and the private organizations are only 10%. But for instance, take a country like India, and the kind of statistics will be really staggering, because it's the affluent people, the well-offs, who just go to these private schools, and the mint money in the name of commercialization. And although that's a different issue, the point I am trying to make is, in order to stop these dropouts, governments should take initiative to provide quality education, first of all, at government schools, and encourage children not through by noon mean scheme alone. But of course, they are right now providing the technologies also. But it has to reach a lot in terms of methods, in terms of quality teaching, in terms of materials. I believe the dropout rates will be lesser. Thirdly, I think there is also another facet to the argument. Many people think, a degree is an eligibility for them to just get married. They feel, okay, I just want to get this. I have heard students frankly telling me this over these years. I just want an engineering degree because it just gives me the kind of an identity I to just get married. So they feel that they have the social status. But unfortunately, this is a very stigmatized and narrow view. And of course, many girls, for the matter, once they get married, they cannot pursue their education further. So there are various segments to it, various pockets to it. But again, the solution to this is to make education affordable to everybody, especially at the primary and secondary level, not only through noon meal schemes. So much of money is being pumped into education, but unfortunately, the government spends a lot of money on frivolous projects, on issues that really doesn't deserve a lot of merit, in the name of constructing edifices, statues, memorials. So much of taxpayers' money is being pumped in. Probably the same money is kind of channelized towards education. All those frivolous expenses are channelized towards education. Probably we can dream of lesser dropouts. But again, it is a kind of a phenomenon that has to come from the political level. But having said that, I have a final point to make in terms of solutions. Sometimes we always look for political solutions, because it has to come from politics. But we also should look for solutions at a judiciary level. There should be strong laws created on how people, taxpayers' money should be channelized. And if, of course, if it is channelized properly, I believe that education could not only be reached to the common man. There will not only be equity, but also be lesser dropouts. So I think that's the only way to reduce the dropouts, is to make education affordable to the common man through the incentives that the government is providing, both at the primary level and the uh, even at the tertiary level. There should be a lot of funds for the government institutions, and there should be a lot of scholarships for the economically backward students. And you should also study of why students drop out. And based on this survey, we should just make more calibrated solutions based on people's problems. So at the lower level, it can help if government steps in, and the higher level also, dropouts can be stopped if people's needs are studied in depth. So I think these are some of the practical solutions to this ever-existing perennial problem. Yeah.
Thank you, sir, for giving us your valuable input and sharing your point of view regarding this question. Now, over to Asfar for the next question regarding the financial aspect in this system.
I feel like you gave a wide range of solutions for the dropout problem, like not just one, but you looked at all aspects and all views from where we could approach the solution. Now, about the next question, I think you already touched on this question. On both the previous questions, question one and two, even though it was about dropouts and about content, you still talked about finance. Many believe that insufficient funds or finances is the primary challenge faced by the education system. Do you agree with this statement, or do you believe that the current available finances that are being channeled into the education system are enough but are not being used efficiently, or not reaching where they should.
Yeah, absolutely. As you said, this is kind of an all-encompassing problem. Though I have touched upon it in my previous question, especially in terms of funds reaching the common man. It's often and it is always has a kind of a strata in which the funds reach people. As we know, the kind of a political fabric, the amount of fund that is allotted for education is really staggering. Let's say infrastructure. Let's deal one issue at a time. Every year government pumps central pumps in so much of money for infrastructure development at the school level, because over the past 10 years, in terms of laboratory and in terms of the infrastructure, the toilet facilities, there was a time when for a big school there were only a few toilets and the basic requirement was not met. But today government has invested so much, so it all boils down to the development in infrastructure. So let us discuss about how government has invested in infrastructure, and does it reach people. Let's say some 500 $1,000 are invested in the infrastructure development in a state like Tamil Nadu. But do they all reach the common man? Do they all reach people? Again, it has to go through the political level. That is the system that we have. It has to go through the political level, and it has through the other agencies it's being distributed. Finally, it reaches the principal. Take a ration for the example. I just go and purchase 2 kgs of rice, and nowadays it's a kind of an electronic system. No, I had to go and make my thumb imprint. I can take my 2 kg. Next minute, I get a message that you have got a ration. So now using my card, nobody else can make a purchase, right? But if you look at how the money reaches people, if let's say in Chennai corporation schools, the fund allotted is say about 1 million, let's say, it has to be directly distributed to the heads of the institution, where each one can directly make the disbursement. So if that kind of systems are available, where it doesn't come through the political fabric and then reaches the institutions, I think this infrastructure development and the funds can be properly channelized. And again, time and time again, we hear a lot of news on corrupt practices, especially in terms of purchasing big. For purchasing laptops, there is a corruption. We have read about political parties tearing each other apart with factual evidence. Isn't it a great pathos for so much of money to be invested and people trying to swindle the money that comes to education and swindle the money that comes to healthcare? So these things are really happening. So I frankly believe that a system should change for the money to be properly channelized. And secondly, my second point is, which I made earlier, I would just like to extend the point. So the taxpayers' money should be properly channelized for education, because there's a lot of statistics which say that India is the youngest country in terms of in 2020 India will be the youngest nation. So naturally, so much has to be done to perk up the educational infrastructure. And if you squander that in 20 years' time, you are just going to formulate a very weak educational system. And of course, in many of the previous writings, Sashi Tharoor has made this statement, and he has just given statistical evidence on how the educational infrastructure is poor. And to exactly answer Afzal's question, I believe that these are the reasons which gives us strong evidence that it is not being channelized properly, that there's so much of corruption taking place in terms of channelizing the funds towards education. Say it educational infrastructure, say it the distribution of materials. Again, when it comes to distribution of books, again distribution of uniforms. I would just like to give you an example. At the primary level, recently uniforms were distributed to children, and ultimately people want to show that, okay, the money, the funds have been granted and we are distributing. And isn't it crazy for the government to call the students during the lockdown period? It happened a few months back. The students were made exclusively to come during the holidays, and the uniforms were distributed to them. And ultimately what's going to happen is, For this term, again, they are going to distribute, which means the uniform that they purchased earlier is just at home. So it's just for namesake, for record's sake, that people are doing to show that we have done. So the money is frankly not channelized properly. It doesn't reach the common man. And in terms of educational infrastructure, there's a lot of swindling that takes place. And all these facts are as clear as daylight. So there should be a kind of a centralized system where money reaches people and it should be channelized properly. So yeah, it's not been channelized properly, to answer your question frankly.
Completely agree with you, sir. Even the point which you said that they're only doing it for namesake. Even in Chennai right now, there's so much new works coming up because election is coming up. So
Absolutely.
if they do this kind of work all the time, if they work this hard the entire time instead of just during election period, we would be in a much better place.
Absolutely.
To move
Absolutely.
on to the next question is something that we don't know much about. It's about professor training and how it works. So over to you, Hamad, for the question.
Thank you, Asfa. Sir, let's now talk about training the professors. So, regular training is a necessity for professors because only if then they have the latest knowledge, they can impart it effectively to the students, helping with their future. What is the current scenario like in college in terms of professor training and how it can be improved?
That's really a focused question, Hamad. In terms of professors' training is there at all levels. Especially, let's take there's something called on the job training. Let's take an engineer for that matter. You just get employed in a particular company. When they go, the company gives a 6 months training, or sometimes even they just give an apprenticeship or 1 or 2 years of training, on the job training. But unfortunately, you don't have on the job training at the educational landscape. The Ministry of Human Resource Development has certain induction programs, induction programs for the teachers, where they go and take a 1 month induction program on the kind of the pedagogies, the kind of new technologies, or the kind of interaction strategies on how to go about it, and you have expert lectures. But that is for a minimum period of 1 month. So it is not for an extended period of time. But yes, to answer your question, training is really happening, but it is not for an extended period of time. That's one observation. And secondly, if you look at the nature of the profession, educational profession, the training that takes place when person just enrolls for a degree, as a part of their curriculum, they are exposed to all new methodologies. For example, teaching methodologies. When you should be a teacher at the school level, of course you have to clear some examinations. But again, those examinations do really test only factual information, how much a teacher knows. But none, unfortunately, they really don't test the skill level. But of course, there is a kind of a training for the teachers, what they call as the a bachelor's of education program. So they are supposed to go 3 or 4 months and go and teach at rural places to understand the psyche of students. So there's a kind of an exposure for them to teach live, which is a part of their curriculum. And then again, they do on the job training. And thirdly, Hamad, it again boils down to institution. Again, you work in top notch institutions, and these institutions have their own system for regularly providing the training to the faculty in terms of leveraging the new technologies, in terms of new pedagogies, in terms of knowing what are the best practices in education, and what is a kind of an emerging niche areas in teaching. So it all boils down the kind of institution that they work. So the top-notch institutions do provide that kind of training. But again, it is quite an isolated phenomenon. This kind of standard training doesn't take place at all institutions per se. And that is why we have disparity. Just as there should be a common benchmarking for assessment, just as there should be a common benchmarking for a common syllabus, there should also be a common benchmarking for the standard of teaching, for the delivery instruction. And so it shouldn't really boil down to just clearing up the examination and becoming a professor, but how you can expose your skill set. So there should be certain examinations that test the practical skills of the students, A, and B, there should be a lot of regular training, periodic training. But again, there is a lot of funds invested in this direction. National education policy, as well as the Ministry of Human Resource Development, had taken a lot of initiatives. There are a lot of funds which are allotted for these purposes to enhance, to recalibrate, to foster the skills of the faculty. So it's all happening, but it is not enough. It has to be more practical, and at places, it is really pathetic. you know Especially at rural places, there are teachers who still follow the policy of making the students to really cram their information and produce. They really focus only on textbook, and there is no focus on teaching, proper teaching practices. So ultimately, Hamad, the focus should shift from the material to very strong pedagogies. There should be a shift from the onus should be not only on the learner but also on the teacher. The onus should not only be on the material. The onus should not only be on the technology. The onus should also be on the methodology or the delivery mode, or the student should be trained probably on psychology, on understanding the student's psychology and understanding their needs, and not follow a kind of an one size fits all approach to delivery. So I think a lot has to change in this direction, and as of now training is taking place. Lots of funds are allotted for this purpose, yet a lot has to be done in terms of practical implementation. Yeah.
Yes, sir, you're absolutely right. And updating the knowledge of professors, it will help them in turn, it'll help us as students as well. By training, we can have effective class management skills, creating new teaching strategies, etc. So it is like a win-win situation for both professors as well as students. So
True,
going
Ahmad.
moving
Well
on,
said.
moving
Yeah.
on to the next question, it's this is the how caste and religion plays a vital role in this system. Over to us for now.
Before I start the question, I'd like to say that I completely agree with your previous answer. And there's one point that I'd like to highlight, the point about rural areas. Now, every problem that we discussed so far and that we will discuss, it's there across the country. But in rural areas, it is majorly there, and it's a huge problem there. Like each of the problems, I mean, we might not know it, we might have faced it in little amounts, but there it is much much worse. So there are lots, like you said, lots of technology and lots of work needs to be done. For the
True.
next question, like he said, we already agreed that education should be affordable to all. And if we have to see, if we look at our country as a knowledge economy, we need to offer quality education to all. And for that purpose, many believe that education should not be rationed as it is today. So, do you think that financial support to students based on caste and religion should be stopped? I mean, I know this is a very important and sensitive topic, but many believe that these reservations create societal division and lead to the brain drain phenomenon.
Yeah, yes, as you said, it's really a sensitive, topic to discuss. Uh, but however, there are certain things which could be unconstitutional, which you may say which can be against the constitution. But as citizens, we always have the right of dissent, where we express our opinions frankly, because we live in a democratic setup where everybody is entitled for their opinion. So before I answer this question, let me give you the student take on this issue. So far, have been a part of debates on the current educational system, and especially with regard to the reservation system. And the students' take on the issue is 100 of out of 100 students are against this reservation, which is based on caste or creed. But we should really understand personal perspective. We should really understand the history. We should understand the roots, because we live and we often make choices based on the current context. But we should look at the roots as to why these reservation problems cropped up. For a few centuries back, certain fringes of the society were so much exploited. And when one reads the history, they'll be moved to tears on how people of certain communities were really exploited. And at that time, policymakers really thought that there should be a way out. Why should a cobbler remain a cobbler? Why should a scavenger remain a scavenger forever? There should be a way out to help the scavenger also to be a clerk at an office. Forget about he being an IAS officer. That's a different dimension. He should be a clerk. He should also be entitled to any other kind of a job that human society is entitled to. Every human being is entitled to. So they wanted to bring those people on top, and they felt that the only way out, because when people come together for certain solutions, and when they arrive at a solution, at that time it was thought that the only solution that Ambedkar conceived upon was a solution that could help people to come out of this shell is to provide them the reservation. But again, it had conditions. Till the lower strata of society, reach at marginal level, and where there is equality, and we can go on to that system. Having said that, in the name of a reservation, the current context and the current landscape that we are discussing reservation. When we discuss reservation maybe 100 years back, probably yes, it's okay to have reservation based on caste, creed, and community. But in the current context, I would like to echo the student sentiments, the students' views. Strictly no, because there are times where a student has a high cutoff, a very high cutoff, but couldn't make a medical seat or couldn't crack up a JEE, couldn't crack up any examination. Whereas he comes across another candidate who is below par on comparison with her, and that candidate makes it. And what happens? It has disastrous repercussions. It repercussions in terms of the quality in the educational landscape. Now people have to sacrifice quality if such things do happen. So that is why the recent government, I am sure that you are aware of it, they came out with a mandate. It's okay to have reservations, but they came out with a mandate. Why should reservations be based on community? Why should reservations be based on caste? It kind of makes the society filled with so much of disparity. Now, to bring equity, what can be done? So the only way they could think of bridging the gap is to provide 10% of reservations to the economically downward society. So there is another criteria here coming into picture, and the criteria is include the 10% who are economically weaker. But again, there is a challenge. How do you calculate if a person is economically weaker? Anybody can just come out with fudged, documents. Today, a person who just gets an income of below 8 lakhs, below 5 lakhs needn't pay the tax. So easy economically downward. So these things have to be really properly defined. What is meant by economically downward? What is the kind of income being expected? So I feel, to answer your question directly, I feel this reservation system shouldn't be based on caste and creed, but it can be based on the economical strata. And that economical strata has to be clearly defined of what is actually meant by a low income group. B, there should be proper documentation, authenticity, and validity to check out if that reservation actually reaches those 10% of people. Because unfortunately, it doesn't exactly reach. And to give another point, there was a time where people could, just get fake community certificates. And there are a lot of people, and that racket came out, in articles before some time, where people have got a government jobs by changing the community, and they come under reservation quota. So much has happened, and so much of water has run under the bridge. So it's high time that there should be no reservation based on caste and community, but there should be a reservation based only on the economic strata. I'm sure that the student fraternity will agree with that, because I'm actually not echoing my opinion. I have had these kind of discussions in the classroom, and I'm sure almost all the students have vociferously, protested against this caste-based, uh, you know, reservation, and most of them, unfortunately, have been victimized because of this. And those people know the pain much better. So it's very easy to talk at the surface level, but people who have been affected, and they will really feel it. So definitely, there should be no reservation based on caste. Yeah.
Completely agree with you, sir. So far, we had a reservation based on caste, like you said, because of history, because particular castes were exploited, and because it was the moral obligation. But as we are moving towards, as a developing country, moving more and more, I feel like your answer was perfect. I never thought of this perspective of having it completely based on economic factors. I guess right now there's about a mix of economic and caste, right? I feel like they do a non-creamy layer certificate check, which checks that the finances are below so and so level of the family.
Yeah.
So yeah, moving on to the next question. So next question, I guess this talks about federalizing and nationalizing all private educational institutions. Over to Hamad for that question.
Okay. So let's talk about corruption in the system, sir. Education in India is frequently looked as a business, and corrupt people, money launderers, politicians use education institutions to hide their black money and earn heavy income from educational institutions through clever structuring. Hence, do you think we should nationalize private educational institutions in tune with federal structure and compensate the investors sufficiently? In this way, do you think is there a possibility that education up to 10th could be made free of cost?
Yeah. Again, that's really quite a focused question, and I'm afraid that you know there aren't any concrete solutions as of now to overcome this issue. Uh, but I would, to just give you a specific question, to just echo what I have said earlier about, there are two. Whenever we look for solutions, we look solutions only from the political spectrum, because politicians have to give solutions to these kind of issues. But there should be a strong judiciary to kind of, formulate a system of benchmarking standard, what standard is. And also, as you said, a kind of corruption and money laundering in the name of education institutions to, hide their taxes is quite a pertinent issue. And as you really said, these big educational institutions are run by these business tycoons and people who are in the political landscape for a long time. But having said that, there was a constitution amendment which was made in 2000. Though I don't remember the constitution, though since I don't belong to the legal, entity, all education institutions should not commercialize education. A. B. Higher education institutions, whatever money they make in education institutions, they should again spend it to the society for the cause of education, in the name of scholarships, and in the name of disbursing the salary to the staff and things like that. So the money that comes into an educational spectrum should once again go back to education. So it cannot go to business. The money cannot be channelized to somewhere else. So the money should once again be channelized to perk up the education. So, but how can this happen? Again, is there a kind of a proper monitoring system? That is there a kind of a centralized system in order to check out whether people are paying the right taxes? Because people have binomies, and there are a lot of loopholes for everything. So it's true that you mentioned that education institutions cannot really be centralized, cannot have a kind of a common benchmarking. But I believe to a certain extent, so some of them may not agree, privatization has really improved the standard in certain sectors, right? In certain sectors it has improved the standard. But if you take the educational sector, I firmly believe that the onus should be on the government to change the private. or kind of undertake the government. Well, let's give you a concrete example. Let's take IITs. We have IITs, and still we have scope for increasing those kind of standard institutions. Now, those standard institutions are run by the governments, by the central governments, and they have a benchmarking. A person could get a seat at Stanford, but it is very difficult for a person to get a seat at the IITs, and it is a known fact. And the selection criteria is so rigid. So we can't say that there is no standard. At certain institutions in India, the standard is too high, and at certain places it is quite mediocre. But unfortunately, there are a lot of mediocre institutions and a few standard institutions. And again, I want to compare it with the US system. 90% of public and 10% of private. So here the only way is government should pump in a lot of money, channelize many institutions. Government should take an undertaking, have a kind of a common policy, and try to maintain the same kind of standards in all institutions, in terms of providing the infrastructure, in terms of providing the training, in terms of providing the funding. Because these days central universities, central institutions get more funding, and state universities get less funding. So this is in terms of higher education. But again, if you take school level today, you see these kind of centralized schools like the Kendra Vidyalayas. They do a remarkable job. The point I'm trying to make is, for the money laundering to stop, educational landscape, the whole educational spectrum should fall under the ambit of the government responsibility, or the government initiative, or the government undertaking. Only then this issue can be stopped. And again, there is no one solution. I think this can be easy to say in words, but to materialize to action, there are a lot of difficulties in making this true. But I believe that this is the only way out, my personal perspective.
Thank you, sir. I like the solution of how you told how money earned through educational institution should be spent in education sector itself. By
Absolutely.
this method, we can actually improve the quality of education as well. Coming to the next question, we are going to talk about how we neglect the Indian languages in educational system. Over to you, Asfar.
Even though, like you said, the quality of private education is really high, and like in rural areas and public areas, they prefer more of Indian languages, that is Hindi, Tamil, and the other languages. But especially in the field of science and engineering, etc., the medium of instruction is English. I understand the medium of instruction. Furthermore, the subjects or the books that are there, the study material is also in English. It is not available in native languages. So, what are the prospects regarding this? Do you think new resources will be made available in Indian languages in any time in the near future, or should we go about translating the existing publications for in into native languages?
Yeah, yes, Fahim. I feel that there are two sides of a coin. A, we really cannot come to a conclusion that there aren't any standard publications, or, when you take the global landscape, where we stand as second language speakers, in terms of the literature available, compared to countries like China and Korea, who are doing remarkably well. You see, India is doing remarkably well in terms of science, all because of our proficiency in second language. Okay, and Afzar also talked about translation. And again, I just want to quote the example of China, who have been so rigid in not learning English, and there was so much of resilience shown by countries like Korea. But if you look at the scientific advancements, the engineering advancements, again, Japan is a classic example. Those countries are really averse to a foreign language, or to have an universal language. and they want all the literature to be in their mother tongue. But it had a lot of catastrophic repercussions over a period of time. And now they also have realized that they are way behind if they don't learn the universal language. And there is a strong orientation of countries which have shown doesn't towards English language to embrace it. So I would say that trying to cast away a particular language, a universal language especially, though it's quite a sensitive problem that can spark a lot of controversies, but to answer quite frankly, people who are against a language, or the people, A, one who had made an effort and couldn't learn it, and B, because of political vendetta, again vested interest, somebody tries to stop, let's say again Tamil Nadu, this particular state, people have been trying to stop Hindi for over a period of time. All the other states are okay with it. And again, there is vested interest because they garner people's votes in trying to exploit the sentiments of people. So, although that's a different issue to talk about. So, I feel that we shouldn't, in order to compete in the global landscape, we shouldn't try to, cast away the universal language, but to embrace it. At the same time, you need an universal language to communicate the literature of your language available. That is why I absolutely agree with Azfar, who asked a fascinating question about translation. Every language is rich in their literature. Let's take medical field for that matter, Azfar. Let's take medical courses like Ayurveda, the Siddha, the ancient sciences, and where those kind of sciences today can be translated. Of course, they are translated into English, and there is a lot of craze among Europeans to go and do $1 million research and to pump in $1 million towards Ayurveda research. And why do you think all this is happening? It's all happening because of the translation, and because there is a kind of an universal language that stands as a barrier. So I believe that this phenomenon of language, we should not be averse to any language. We should accept what is universal language. We should embrace what is universal language, and by that you can propagate your language. But the other side of the coin is, to just give you an example, we have come across a lot of students in the south, who had wonderful marks, who can crack their examinations, but they go to an interview, they couldn't crack examinations like the NEET, which is based on language proficiency. They know only in their tongue. So if you that is one phenomenon, that is one spectrum to deal with. So it's like two sides of the coin. But the important issue here is there is only one way out for people who are caught in a trap, people who are caught in a maze. And the only way that you can progress, the only way you can compete, the only way you can really carve a niche for yourself, and the only way that you can take your country to great heights is not to be rigid towards any particular language, but to embrace, especially embrace the universal language. And by this, you can also propagate your own language, because the richness of your literature should reach the globe. So it's both ways. Avzar. Yeah.
That was an amazing answer, sir. Been a lot more than I expected. I mean, I didn't see the perspective of casting away languages and what the ill effects it can have. Now that you've told me, it's a really, really important factor in this topic. Next up to about common education systems and how they're not, how there's various different education systems in India. Hammad, over to you.
Yeah. So the concept of wearing uniform in schools and other educational institutions was introduced so that everyone will be seen and treated equally. But this system is not followed by the system. There is no common school system. Instead, children are channeled into private, government aided, and government schools on the basis of ability to pay and social class. Example CBSE, IGSC, HSC, etc. Do you think we should establish a single common system so that the students are better equipped when they get to college?
Yeah, true, very true. That's again a question which has multiple variables. Is quite the question itself is quite comprehensive. You see, the first aspect that question is to have a single window system. Is it possible to have a single window system? And thirdly, Secondly, I have heard students telling me that a CBSE child who studies, for instance, a science at fifth standard, a state board student, has access to it only in the ninth or tenth standard. So there is a lot of disparity in terms of standard, in terms of content. So it all boils down to content. So there is a huge gap in terms of standard. A and B. Let us first address this issue of uniformity because you spoke about this uniformity. Secondly, you see, recently the government of Tamil Nadu has declared that there are no board examinations. So all the students are passed. All the students have passed their 10th examinations. But CBSE and IGSE, they have to take up their examinations. Let's see both of them, once they just move on to the next sphere, next level, what do you think is the standard? Already there is a huge gap, and it will take a lot of years to bridge the gap. And again, there is a huge gap in these kind of policies just for the sake of garnering votes. So the aspect of universalization of education again is the common window system is again what you call has a great block because of a political fabric. That's one thing. And secondly, education today is looked upon as a money spinning business. Private organizations don't want that to happen because today, this Cambridge syllabus has even come to India. And Cambridge every year, in the name of Cambridge examinations, they have been looting, to use these kind of words. I know they are very controversial, to plunder our resources which happened pre-independence. It's happening post-independence in the name of offering language courses, by the in the name of Cambridge language courses. So much of money is being taken away, and there is a craze for the elite class to enroll their children in the Cambridge schools, and it is only the elite class again who sends their children to CBSE schools. And usually the people who are not affluent are the ones who unfortunately send their children to the government schools. So it's one thing is crystal clear. Education is for the haves and not for the have-nots. And the only way to bring that kind of universalization is, Hammad, the solution is in your question itself. There should be a common window system. And for that to happen, we should bring a system as happened in Finland, as happened in US. 90% for the government sector, 10% for the private sector. And again, funding for all the persons, for the elite class who are above a particular income, maybe can pay in such elite schools. But people who don't have the resources, the government should pay for them. So if you have a common system right from the formative stages of education, in 20 years, the entire educational landscape will change. The common system will bring equity, because ultimately the bottom line is equity. And for that equity to happen at all levels, it is a big cycle, and it has to start from the grassroots level. People should maintain that intensity at all levels, and this is something that has to go on for many years. And yes, as you said, I foresee that a single window system, a common system, will reduce a lot of stress among people, will bring equity, will reduce disparity, and education will serve its purpose. I think I have answered your question.
Thank you, sir. I actually never thought the way as your point of view as to how Cambridge classes are just there for business purposes only and which cannot be afforded by the poor people. Thank you, sir. Now for the next question, our personal favorite and probably a fan favorite too, as most of our audience are students. Over to you, Asfar.
So this question is about assignments and homework. So it has been a common opinion, as you would already know, among students across India that assignments and repetitive writing tasks or blind copying like lab journals is in really high amounts and is highly stressful. And this is something that didn't even stop during the pandemic. In fact, it increased exponentially because it was online learning. We were given all the more assignments. Do you think that throughout the education system, the quantity of assignments and homework needs to be reduced while quality increased?
Yeah, sure. This kind of competition between quality and quantity is really a pressing issue that has to be addressed, and we got to really define what quality is and what quantity is. And I'm sure as students, I can really understand the anguish the students feel when they're really bombarded with too many things, and of course, and most of the things which doesn't cater to their creative instincts, that doesn't really help them. Again, as you said, most of the information or the assignments today are just only factual, because that's what the students have said in these kind of discussions. A factual information where you could just go and research or Google it, find an information present in the way you like. So it doesn't actually cater to triggering your creative instincts. Again, I can't really pass these kind of very casual statements. It depends on the teacher, regardless of the discipline, regardless of the level. If teachers are really creative, they give project based assignments that could really test that particular skill, or I won't say test their skill, but could calibrate their skill and help them to face real life. I think those kind of assignments students will really embrace with a lot of interest. So this again cannot be a kind of a common benchmarking, and we cannot take all students' perspective to be true. Yeah, we can't say that all assignments are really not creative. It all boils down to the faculty who gives them the assignment. It all depends on, again, it's very difficult in a large class. For instance, it's very difficult to give each one a different assignment, but assignments could be really collaborative. I personally feel assignments shouldn't be individual. That's my take on this issue. Assignments should really be collaborative. It should be really project oriented. By the end of the assignment, it should have helped you to improve your domain knowledge, to improve your practical knowledge, and most importantly, it should help you to calibrate your practical skills. And that is how the assignment should be. And finally, I believe that students' perspective, most students feel that they're not only bombarded by assignments, but most of the assignments are really factual, and most of the assignments are just based on research where you could lift information and present it. That has to change. That really has to change, and something has to be really done about it. And I can really understand your anguish. So the only way out is to make it more practical oriented. Yes, but I believe that a lot of teachers are already doing that. And again, there are a few cases where you're doing otherwise as well. Yeah.
Sir, I agree with you, sir, as for assignments, that it's mostly factual. But there's one thing that's common across all colleges and across all teachers, that is lab records. Now, these records, we are basically given all the content, we copy it from here and write it down here. Lots of experiments, lots of time to write. It's just manual work, no thinking, nothing. So, do you think that is really necessary for the sake of those 5, 10 marks at the end in practical examination?
Yeah, very
Why
pertinent
keep
question.
marks for that?
Yeah, very pertinent. Actually, being a part of a few meetings at the academia, I just believe that policymakers are also thinking hard about these kind of policies. And every year they're also thinking about what to revamp. And one of the important agendas, I'm just talking about my institution, generally any top-notch institution is really, the academia, the top brass, they're really racking their brains to make it very, very creative. In order to lessen the burden, they are trying to do away with the return things and make it more practical oriented. So in the near future, you may see a lot of creative assignments. You may see that the management may try to do away with these kind of written assignments. So a lot of innovation has gone into it. A lot of thinking has gone into it by educationalists, by policymakers, both at the institution level and at the government level. So near future, everything will change. Definitely. Yeah.
So, for the next question, it's again about technology in education. India has to embrace high speed internet technology in our educational delivery system. Obviously, it has started in some places. And universities infrastructures need to be integrated and interlinked with this information and communication technologies. But do you think that technological infrastructure and advancement should be done right now, or are there more important factors that we should focus on before we actually get to technological advancement? Are there other basic things that need more focus rather than jumping to technology?
Yes. Uh, Azwar, as far as leveraging technology is concerned, I believe that really, takes place only at the higher education. But if you look at primary education, children are still under hibernation. It's been quite a long hibernation. The schools haven't opened. They still do not have access because being such a big nation with different deep pockets where still there are no internet connection, where there are not even, cell phone towers, in such a country with demographic diversity, the deep pockets, still people do not have access. So to make this kind of technology to reach people is a kind of a distant dream. Despite pumping in so much of dollars in this, it is going to materialize only, after a few decades, if you constantly, pump in all your money into it. So it- see, leveraging technology is only one dimension, but how do you reach? Fundamentally, it all boils down how you reach students at the primary level. How do you reach people at the suburbs? How do you reach people in the deep pockets who are under long hibernation, who do not have exposed to teachers? Let's forget about internet connectivity. They haven't met the teachers for, months now, almost a year. So how are we going to first cater to that requirement? But is there a kind of a mobile way to kind of, I'm not talking about mobile technologies, I'm talking about mobile teachers, wherein government can recruit more people who are educated in order to go to the students to their places and reach, rather than calling the students to schools, which is not possible. And the norm might change. So to have a larger pool of teachers to just go to their particular villages, to the deep pockets, call them and teach. So I think technology all boils down to the human man with more recruitment, reaching more children at the deepest pockets where there is no accessibility. But having said that, where there is already accessibility, where there is connectivity, their educational technology can be better leveraged, especially in educational landscapes, higher educational landscapes. It can be really leveraged. But education starts all at the primary level. And if you ignore that, it's like when you ignore the roots, you can't expect a healthy offshoot. So I think we have to really focus on the root to have a healthy offshoot and to bear rich fruits today. I mean, that's my opinion.
Amazingly put, sir.
Yeah.
Now to the final question of the night about online education and the online learning that we went through for the past year. Over to Hamad for the final question.
So for this question, I have two parts for you. The first part is, what is your opinion on online college education? Does it provide the same quality as on-campus education? The second part is, many experts, even parents, have suggested that this year considered to be a zero year and repeated by all students. What is your opinion on the same?
Fine. Let me focus on the first question initially about is online technology better than face to face technology? Personally, no matter how interactive you try to be in an online space, nothing like just going and building a rapport with the students. I believe the real education takes place in triggering their cognition. And in order to trigger their cognition, you need to have a good rapport with them. Education is not about delivery of content. Education is about understanding their emotions. Education is giving a human touch to the material. It's not about what material is delivered, but about how the material is delivered. About It's not about what you say, how you understand the student. And not all students come with the same mindset. So there is no parallel to a face-to-face space. There's definitely no parallel to it. But having said that, in order to bridge this gap, you can't leave the children for a too long time. So naturally, this is just a substitute. What is right now happening is a substitute, but there is definitely no equal to face-to-face instruction, and that is what every student will feel. I believe just coming and feeling the joy of being in the classrooms, the interaction of being in the classrooms, having a close rapport with your teachers, and naturally, psychologically, you will be quite healthy, not in an online space, but definitely in an offline space. So there is no parallel to offline space. Again, there are different dimensions to this particular answer, but primarily let us focus on only one dimension of building a rapport. So that cannot happen in an online space, but can happen only in a face-to-face space. And the second part of your answer, and by the way, what was your second part, Hammad?
So it was regarding the 0 year. Many
Zero
experts.
year. That's a very important question. See, when you talk about 0 year, a year which is really null, where nothing is happening. Let's say everybody, maybe a 19-year-old student at an engineering level, let's say we declare that as a null year. So, which means that year he literally does not do anything. Now, what happens is cognition for a 19-year-old child, that is the level of cognition. So he misses 1 year, and let us say you give him a pass. Okay, but but if it's a null year, the candidate should not be given a pass, right? Because it's a 0 year, practically speaking, which means he goes to the same year again. But would you be, Hammad, would you be willing to continue in the same year, considering that you have had a long hibernation or a break? Definitely not, right? You would not be willing to continue in the same year. So definitely not. So this idea of 0 year is not such a good idea to have, because practically speaking, 0 year is a year where you do literally nothing. All right, so I am quite against this philosophy of having a 0 year. Again, the same thing goes in the school level, and I really kind of debunk or question this logic of 0 year. If you call something a 0 year, the government declares that all the students have passed, all the students without taking the examination has passed. But how can this practically take place in a 0 year where there is no educational activity? Doesn't that question the very fabric of educational system? Okay, that's one thing. Secondly, let us take a person from a CBSE or who takes up the examination and goes for an interview, and a candidate who has just passed without taking up the examination. What do you think the interviewer's perspective would be? You just think from the interviewer's perspective. You think about the society's perspective. Okay, the child has cleared the examination without taking up the examination. He has moved to the next year. So this the concept of 0 year is something which is unacceptable for me. Yeah,
I agree with you, sir, because a lot of efforts went into online education, and keeping up. Exams were conducted online more and more, like however possible, and so yeah, if considering a 0 year would be a huge wastage of resources and also time.
absolutely.
So I guess that brings us to the end of the show. We have had a very interactive and informative session. Thank you so much, sir, for spending your Sunday evening with us. To be honest, this has been the most productive Sunday evening for me since the pandemic started. Thank you
Wow.
so much, sir, for sharing your insights and your knowledge with us today. Thank you, audience, for watching and staying with us this whole time. Please like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Thank you.
Just a final word for him. I
Yes,
would
sir.
especially thank Fahim and Hammad for those kind of brilliant questions, for wonderfully hosting the session, for your calibrated follow-ups, for giving your insights. And as you said, I have really thoroughly enjoyed this Sunday evening, and I believe I have had a productive time as well. Thank you for hosting me, and really thank the organizers for hosting me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir.